For this lesson, Lesson 1, Reading Literary Text Introduction, I'm just going to give you kind of an overview of what literary text is. And we're going to watch two videos. And these videos, watching both of them, is going to take about 20 minutes, but it's going to give you a really good idea of the different types of text there are in literary text. So please make sure you watch this full video so you get kind of an overview, because we will be talking about literary text this whole semester. Okay, so you need to know what it is. So literary text is fictional or imaginary. It includes things like poetry, short stories, novels, and plays, and different kinds of genres like realistic fiction, fantasy, science fiction, and mystery. So let's watch a couple of videos and she'll make it a lot more clear, and she explains very well each different type or each different genre of literary text.
Hello, my name is Kylie, and welcome to Literary Genres Fiction Part 1. Did you know there are over 12 different types of writing? In this video, you'll learn about the first 6 styles of literature that you can choose to read. Are you ready? Let's go! Genre. In French, it means style or type of something. So instead of asking, what type of book are you reading? You could ask, what genre is the book you are reading? Pretty fancy, huh? You may already know that the things you read can be grouped into 2 main categories: things that are true or factual, and things that are made up in someone's imagination. One way to remember which is to think that since fiction is made up, nonfiction is not made up. The non in the word can remind you of the word not. Some people also like to think of the word that fiction comes from, fictitious. Fictitious means not real, not true, made up in one's mind. There are many types of both fiction and nonfiction. In this video, we will concentrate on fiction. There are several interesting types of fiction reading. There's realistic fiction, fantasy fiction, science fiction, tall tale, myth, fable, folk tale, fairy tale, mystery, historical fiction, drama, and poetry. Let's learn a little bit more about each of the first 6, and then when you're ready for more, make sure to watch part 2 of this video series. Realistic fiction is one of the most common types of fiction written. The story is made up, but everything in the story could actually happen. So, in realistic fiction, there are no flying lizard monkeys or talking animals. What makes this type of fiction so popular is that it is easier for us, the readers, to imagine the story by putting ourselves into the plot. The plot is the action, or what happens in the story. Both fantasy fiction and science fiction are a lot alike. They are both entirely made of fake or made up places, things, and beings that are not part of our real world. Fantasy fiction often has people, animals, or creatures that have magical powers. Science fiction may also have made up creatures, but these stories can happen in the past or future and often have machines or robots or technology that hasn't been invented. There are so many great examples of fantasy and science fiction stories. Many of these stories are made into great movies, but the books seem to always be better. Tall tales are some of the funniest and entertaining stories to read aloud with friends. Tall tales are humorous or funny stories that have the main character do superhuman, amazing, impossible things. Imagine being able to pick up your entire house, cry so much your tears make a river, or laugh so hard you can cause an earthquake. Most cultures from around the world have their own tall tales. Myths are traditional stories that were originally told aloud to explain a culture's belief. These stories often had gods, goddesses, and mythical beings in them. Mythical beings are made up and don't exist in the real world. Do you notice there are a lot of dragons, unicorns, and trolls on products today? Well, they all got their start as characters in ancient myths. Some of these characters were talked about in myths thousands and thousands of years ago, and yet we are still talking about them today. Roman and Greek myths are often read and talked about today. Some of the characters in these myths are ones that you may have already heard of: Zeus, Hercules, the Minotaur, or Athena. Fables are stories told by people to teach lessons to younger people and often have a lot of talking animals in them. They were originally only told aloud and not written down. Over the years, when books became more available, people wrote them down so they could be read over and over again. Aesop was a famous storyteller in ancient Greece. He told a lot of stories designed to teach young people life lessons called morals. It can be fun to figure out the moral of a fable. Many times the fables were told without telling what the lesson really was. Now we've covered the first 6 types of fiction that you can read and write. Hello, my name is Kylie, and welcome to Reading Literary Genre Part 2. In Part 1 of the video, we've learned about the difference between fiction and nonfiction writing, and we were introduced to the first 6 types of fiction writing. In this video, you'll learn about 6 more styles of literature you can choose to read. Let's go! Okay, so there are many types of fiction reading. In this video, we'll look at folktale, fairy tale, mystery, historical fiction, drama, and poetry. These 2 types of genre are very similar. They both were stories told to entertain. Folktales were stories people told one another around a fire or at bedtime or at dinner. Fairy tales are a specific kind of folk tale. Folk tales could tell the story of a local person doing a good deed, having a bad day, or getting a wonderful gift on their birthday. Fairy tales were a form of fantasy fiction and usually had fantastic beasts, fairies, witches, and other make-believe creatures. They often were meant to be scary and shocking. There are many famous examples of fairy tales. You may have read about Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, or Jack and the Beanstalk. Mysteries are stories that leave you in suspense and often ask, who done it? A mystery is usually all about some sort of crime and the people who are trying to solve it. It can also be about a missing item or even who planned a surprise party. Mysteries are fun to read because as a story happens, you can gather your own clues and try to predict or discover who did what. Historical fiction takes us way back in time to a real historical event. Wait, what? Did I just say real? Yes, but there's a catch. The event from history itself is real, but most of the story, the people, and the small events are made up. Confusing? Think about an event from history. Let's say the American Revolutionary War in the late 1700s. Of course. It was definitely a real war and had many famous historical figures involved in it. George Washington comes to mind. An author who is writing a historical fiction piece may start with the true event and build a story around it. Let's say I take the George Washington's crossing the Delaware River with his troops, a real event, but I make up the story of Scott Townsley, a made-up person who made the boat he crossed in. I make up the boatmaker an exciting story to go with how he barely made the boat in time to help George Washington cross the Delaware River. You see, the story is partly true, with real details about George Washington, the Revolutionary War, and the Delaware River, but also has made-up or fictitious parts like Scott the boatmaker and his crazy adventure making the boat. Drama is a made-up story written to be performed on a stage. This is also called a play. Dramas can be any of the type of fiction we have already discussed. One thing that makes drama different from other genres is that it includes directions for the actors and lists dialogue or words to be spoken. It looks very different from other types of writing. Take a look at a sample from a play about a garden in the city. Poetry is a lot of fun to both read and write. From song lyrics to greeting cards, poetry is part of our everyday culture. Poetry is written in sections called verses. These verses are made up of lines. Each line is brief or short. Poetry uses colorful words and shows how a person feels and thinks and dreams. Poems can rhyme or not, they don't have to. Some poetry can be very organized, like a haiku or a sonnet. These types of poem have a set pattern and rules to how you write them. Other poems are called free verse, and they have no rules. Haikus are an example of a very structured poem. This means strict writing rules that must be followed. All haikus have 17 syllables and 3 lines. The first line having 5 syllables, the second line having 7 syllables, and the third line having 5 syllables again. They are usually about nature, but they also don't have to be. Here is an example of a haiku. An ocean voyage. When blue waves tickle my toes, the sea is my home. Here's an example of a free verse poem with no set rules to follow. The author just wrote what they felt and what came to their mind. The end of my sweet, oh the pain, my sadness is so much. I no longer have that bumpy ice cream cone to touch. I don't know how I'll get through the day, the night, the next day. I am suffering. But wait, that noise? Could it be the amazing sound of the ice cream man's truck? Okay, never mind. I am cool. Oh, the drama. Well, now we've covered many more types of fiction you can read and write. Which one is your favorite? Oh, one more thing. If you really like to read a specific literary genre, why don't you try creating a piece of writing yourself? If you're interested in learning more about how to go about this, you could watch our video series on the writing process. To practice what you've learned, be sure to play our fun online games and quizzes. Until next time, remember to always be clever.
Hey, hey.